Good morning. I'm Dr. Ben Newman. I study coronaviruses. That's my job. Let's try to answer your questions, which are usually pretty good. Yeah. Next question is from Annie. Yeah, who we know. Hi, how you doing? Yeah. Okay, so the question is, how accurate are the oral swabs versus the nasopharyngeal swabs? Yeah, or nasopharyngeal, I guess we can say. Yeah, interesting question. From others, I've heard that at A&M Texarkana, the swab was inside of the cheek and gums. Yes, that is correct. It is the curative sort of cheek swab test. While at the location downtown from gogettested.com, I guess, they swabbed the back of the throat. Okay, interesting. Back of the throat's a good one. And I know there are places in town that are doing nasal swabs as well. I don't know of anywhere that's doing saliva testing, but wouldn't surprise me. All these tests are out there being manufactured, widely available, not just in America, but actually around the world. And so, yeah, pretty good. Okay, so, first of all, yeah, like with most of these papers, I came to it with a fairly strong opinion, which is that you're probably going to get a little bit better results with nasopharyngeal, but you might want to go with a fecal sample, and neither of those is probably going to be as 100% accurate or invasive and terrible as a lavage where they put water down into your lungs on purpose. And yeah, that's not a nice thing to do to people, but it gives you a really accurate result. So what the tests are looking for is the nasopharyngeal test is looking for infection mostly at a little tiny site. It's called your neuroepithelium. It's where your sense of smell actually comes from, where the little smell receptors are located. And that's back up in there in the kind of the top of the nose, inside of the nose. What the mouth swab is looking for is that sometimes salivary glands can get infected. And when they do, you'll have tons of it in the saliva, or you can, sort of swab around. And the idea is that if you have the virus down the lungs, you may be breathing up enough of it that it will stick on the sticky lining on the inside of your mouth and nose, because, yeah, humans are gross, but we can't do anything about that. And then she might be able to swab that off. But in both of these tests, they are going to be a little bit biased when you have an infection at exactly that site and they hit, the Q-tip right on the money, then you're going to get a much higher chance of getting a true positive test for a person that is positive. Yeah. So I figured that probably the nasal swab is going to be the most accurate one out there. So saliva testing is probably going to be less accurate, and swabbing those other places is probably going to be comparable. So the tests at the end of most of these are going to be the same. They're the thing that is being called the molecular test, although, I don't know, to a molecular biologist, they're all pretty molecular, right? But to a scientist, you would call these a PCR test. And so the PCR test is good. Most labs can reliably pick up 50 copies, which came from 50 individual little teeny-weeny virus particles on a test and get you a positive and have that positive be correct. So that's pretty good going, I would say. Yeah. But there was a nice study in the New England Journal of Medicine. It doesn't directly answer your question, but it gets close, and for most of these tests, they will benchmark them on a set of known samples. They'll come up with some kind of limit of detection, but it's always dependent on exactly what the conditions were that they ran these in. And when a company is putting out a new test, they do not benchmark it against an existing test. Actually, it's quite difficult even in the business to buy any of these tests. Because of various rules and just tons of demand, which is actually a good thing, that we are using these to actually test people. So, anyway, the New England Journal of Medicine article, which was from the end of September, I think September 24th, looks at the difference between saliva testing by PCR and nasopharyngeal testing by PCR, and finds that at least in their study, the saliva testing actually gave back a little bit more virus, and gave it back in a couple more people. So it definitely wasn't worse, which is what I would have thought it was, And so I guess if you're doing the test right, then it is possible to get a pretty accurate test. And I would say if there's any test that's involving a PCR at the end of it, that's going to be the gold standard. The other tests, like an antigen test, are much less sensitive. It may take a few thousand or tens of thousands of viruses to actually set off a positive, whereas you can get a positive from 50 little virus particles with the PCR. So, yeah, and that means it doesn't mean you're picking up these infections for people that are only a little bit sick. If you have the virus inside of you, yeah, this is bad news and we need to take precautions. Absolutely. Doesn't matter how much there is there, because the correct amount of SARS-CoV-2 in a human being is 0 and will always be. But what it means is that if you happen to not get lucky, so if you're swabbing the nose and there's no infection in the nose, then it still gives you a chance that enough will have been breathed up and caught on the mucus that you will still get a true positive for a person who is actually positive. That's the idea. And so I think based on that, either of those can work. I like the idea of the throat test, although, I don't know if gagging is better than that horrible feeling when the swab goes up your nose. I don't know, but there were early reports that said that the virus was able to replicate in cells in the throat, but I think subsequent things have found that it's actually pretty far down there. It's basically in the bronchi. But it's throat adjacent, and that would certainly be where, when the virus comes out from the lungs, that's where I would expect it to stick. So, yeah, I think all those are pretty good options. And, the antigen test is okay if you need a real fast result. The best places in town that I have seen, and this is Texarkana, but yeah, this may also be true for you, will do multiple tests. They'll do a rapid antigen right there, give you a result right there, so you can, isolate starting now. And they will at the same time send off your results for a PCR test, which may take a couple days, but will give you the more accurate result. And you've got quick information and you've got accurate information. And it's not in one test, but it's in 2 tests. And that's a good way to do it. All right. Thanks very much. This has been Ask Dr. Ben.